Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. The Arctic used to be where geopolitics went to cool down. Frozen, remote and politely ignored, it was the last place great powers expected to trip over one another. Today, it is doing the opposite. The ice is melting, shipping lanes are opening, and military planners are paying attention once again. Russia, in particular, is not waiting for a consensus or for cooperation. Moscow is building, deploying and signaling, treating the Arctic not as a shared global space, but as a strategic backyard. And as the focus shifts north, Greenland, the North Atlantic and NATO's northern flank are being pulled into a competition that no longer feels theoretical. Here is our latest report.
With a substantial northern coastline, Russia has long played an important role in Arctic geopolitics. The Kremlin also has access to key natural resources in the region, as well as a large scientific research presence. Now, fears are growing in NATO that collective security is threatened not only by Russia's presence there, but also by its collaboration with China. With Arctic ice continuing to recede, Moscow and Beijing have cooperated on joint coastline patrols, including directly north of the border with the American state of Alaska. However, their motives are far from benign. Speaking at a Swedish National Security Conference, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Alexis Grinkevich, warned that the joint missions are aimed at undermining the alliance's capabilities in the region.
As the ice recedes and there's more and more access up there, we certainly see Russia and China working together. We have had Chinese vessels patrolling with Russia, not only on the north coast of Russia, but also north of Alaska and near Canada. And like I mentioned in my remarks, it's not for peaceful purposes. They're not studying the seals and the polar bears. They're out there doing bathymetric surveys and trying to figure out how they can counter NATO capabilities on and under the sea. So that's something that could grow very quickly, and we need to be mindful of it and ready for it.
While the effects of Russian and Chinese collaboration in the Arctic have not fully manifested, NATO has already begun to strengthen its deterrence posture. This includes the unification of NATO activities in the Arctic under one command, improving reconnaissance capabilities, and strengthening Arctic-capable forces.
Russia has publicly released the basic principles of its 2035 Arctic policy. This document defines where Russia's ambitions lie in the region and potentially where it will run into problems with NATO. As always, here is a closer look.
In March 2020, Vladimir Putin approved a document establishing the basic principles of Russian state policy in the Arctic, valid until the year 2035. The document is a successor of a previous Russian Arctic doctrine that was adopted in 2008. Russia's priorities and the geopolitical dynamic can be seen through the adaptation of its Arctic principles from the early 2000s till now. Firstly, the new strategy document introduces the priority of developing the Northern Sea Route as a globally competitive transport corridor. In particular, Moscow is betting on large-scale hydrocarbon and natural resource projects for this sea route to be effective. The Kremlin hopes to tap these Arctic resources and market them in several Asian economies, particularly China. However, this comes at a time of historic lows in prices for oil and liquefied natural gas. Russia has also included the defense of its sovereignty as a new priority in its most recent Arctic strategy, which many see as a mere continuation of past policies. While the Kremlin's ambitions to dominate the Arctic are clear, NATO is not taking the matter lightly. As Russia continues to scale up its influence in the region, Moscow may find itself directly butting heads with Western governments and militaries.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. For years, the Arctic was treated as a future problem. That period, however, is now over. As the ice retreats, the Arctic is no longer a white blank space on the map, but a strategic theater. And Russia has decided it does not intend to share it. Moscow's view of the Arctic is neither romantic nor environmental. It is imperial, logistical, and militaristic. The region is framed as a core part of Russian sovereignty, a natural extension of its territory, and a buffer against Western pressure. In Russian strategic documents, the Arctic is not a frontier. It is a rear area that must be secured, controlled, and, if necessary, defended. That explains why Russia has invested more in Arctic militarization than any other state, rebuilding Soviet-era bases, expanding air defense coverage, and treating the High North as a permanent military district rather than a seasonal concern. At the center of this strategy lies the Northern Sea route. For Russia, this is more than just a regular shipping lane opened by climate change. It is an economic artery, a political tool, and a sovereignty claim, all rolled into one. Moscow insists the route runs through its internal waters, giving it the right to regulate transit, demand escorts, and impose fees. The message is clear. If global trade wants to benefit from a shorter route between Europe and Asia, it will do so on Russian terms. This is why Russia's Arctic posture blends icebreakers with missile systems and commercial rhetoric with military signaling. This posture inevitably draws attention to Greenland. Denmark, which retains sovereignty over the island, has found itself pulled deeper into Arctic security debates that it can no longer treat as abstract. From Moscow's perspective, increased American and Danish attention to Greenland fits neatly into a familiar narrative: NATO encirclement disguised as defensive concern. Russian analysts openly frame US radar upgrades, space monitoring, and patrol activity as preparation for future conflict. In response, Russia justifies its own buildup as reactive, even defensive, despite being the most extensive militarization effort in the region. And Vladimir Putin understands this dynamic well. By acting early, investing heavily, and framing the Arctic as inherently Russian, Moscow is shaping expectations. It is telling the world that this region already has a dominant security actor, and that any challenge to that dominance will be treated not as cooperation, but as provocation. The Arctic is no longer the edge of the map. It is the overlap between climate change, military strategy, and great power rivalry. Russia has moved fast and has moved decisively. As the Arctic warms, the geopolitics around it are heating up even faster. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Przemysław Piotr-Damski, Assistant Professor at the University of Łódź. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So Russia actually has a certain approach, a certain idea concerning the Arctic. It's not just thinking about it as a place of unimpeded navigation, cooperating with other states. It treats this as a question of sovereignty, pretty much, and says, well, if you really want to do trade, well, you have to do this on our terms. To what extent do you think Russia would be able to impose its own restrictions on trade, especially as the ice melts even further and this shipping route becomes viable for the purposes of trade between Europe and Asia, because this is really what it's all about, shortening that route?
Yeah. The ice was acting in favor of Russia because she has the biggest fleet of icebreakers in the world. So without the assistance of Russia, no one could pass Northern Sea route, which she controls. Once the ice cap is melting, and in 2 or 3 years the Arctic is going to be completely free from ice, no one is going to need the assistance of Russia in order to pass the Arctic, especially through the North Pole, because the trans-polar route is going to be shaped. That is why Russia is jealously securing her routes and her possessions in the Arctic. But as I have said, right now, she is not able to ensure her capabilities in the region.
And do you think Russia could be trying some creative use of the law of the sea? That it could try to say, well, these are actually territorial waters because there is a tiny piece of land, like a rock, protruding out of the sea that was hidden beneath the ice. We consider this to be our sovereign territory. We have some documents to back that up, so that actually extends our control. I mean, Russia is known for doing this elsewhere. So do you think that this could be a tool that it could be trying to gain some leverage?
Mm-hmm. Russia tried to do this before 2022, and she was quite close to gain the rights to the Lomonosov Ridge, the bottom of the sea. However, since her full-scale invasion on Ukraine, the other states did not recognize her possible rights here, and she has no leverage, in fact, here, because no one except her is going to recognize this, even China. Right now, China is passing the Arctic thanks to the Russian icebreakers, but Chinese have their own idea of polar Silk Road, so they are not interested, especially in being dependent on Russia.
And speaking of China, because obviously this is a major player, and many people say that Russia is more of a junior partner to China nowadays. Do you think that China, hoping to expand its influence on trade, could try and convince Russia to start and behave the way that Russia usually behaves? So not only making claims, possibly some sort of military adventurism, even in territories like Svalbard, which of course are NATO territories, but where Russia has a tiny foothold there. Do you think that Russia, being the chaos agent serving Chinese interests, could really be the thing that keeps our military planners, not just in Europe, but also in Washington, awake at night, and making them also think about Greenland? That would, partially explain the situation we're in today.
It's a quite difficult question because China was acting quite independently in the Arctic and tried to treat the region like a possible place for scientific research, but American and European intelligences were concerned that those kind of activities were perhaps of dual use. So in fact, under the banner of scientific research, Chinese plan to investigate how the Arctic is working. The route, of course, from Asia to Europe is quite promising, however, not so promising as we can think about it, because yes, this is the shorter route to Europe, okay, but we don't have any significant ports in North Asia which can be used as the places where some goods are secured, saved, stored, and sold, or even sold, and later took to Europe. That is why, despite the fact that this route is shorter, to some extent is not so promising as the route through the Suez Canal, for example. In case of Svalbard, the situation is complicated even more because Svalbard, though it's the territory of Kingdom of Norway, is not the part of NATO. In fact, under the Svalbard Treaty, the signatory states, including the United States and Russia, promised to recognize that this territory is Norwegian territory, however, under the condition that this territory becomes neutral. So no officers, no bases can be deployed on Svalbard. That is why American attempts to explain their activities concerning Greenland as fear what Russians and Chinese are going to do in case of Svalbard and so on, are to the great extent justified. Besides, the United States has the agreements with Denmark since Second World War. And based on those agreements, the United States used to have up to 17 bases on Greenland, which were abandoned after the Cold War. And right now they have only one base there. Denmark has no objections in case of restoring those bases. However, they would like to secure their sovereignty at the island. And this attempt from the side of Denmark is strongly supported by Greenland government.
And of course, I'm glad that you clarified the question of the status Svalbard. I used a mental shorthand concerning the country that controls it being a NATO member. The territory itself, of course, as you said, is not. Now, one final question before we wrap it up. Natural resources, because that's another thing. Apart from trade, this is also about what can actually be extracted from the territory, from beneath the sea, when the ice cover actually gives way. What opportunities are there, and to what extent could Russia lay claim to them?
There are a lot of opportunities to gain natural resources from the territories, as well as those which are crucial for electronics, computers, and so on. So they are very important for the American economy, industry, and European economy industry. In case of, for example, Singapore is captured, Taiwan is captured by China. However, Russia has no claims to this territory and supposed to have no claims, no legal arguments to gain Greenland. That is why I'm saying that American claims under the argument that Russia is threatening Greenland are completely unjustified.
Przemysław Piotr Damski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Russia is urging its citizens to apply for new biometric passports as more European countries move to fully implement the Schengen entry-exit system this spring.
The digital system replaces manual passport stamping with biometric data for non-EU travelers. By April 10th, 29 Schengen countries will no longer accept 5-year non-biometric Russian passports. Russia's embassy in Warsaw said Poland will enforce the new rules starting April 1st, effectively blocking entry with older documents. Several other countries, including Germany and France, have also adopted this system. Despite tighter restrictions, demand for Schengen visas among Russian citizens remains high.
Ukrainian prosecutors have charged Russian opposition activist Leonid Volkov, a former aide to the late Alexei Navalny, with justifying Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The move follows leaked private messages in which Volkov criticized far-right Russian fighters aligned with Ukraine and made negative remarks about Ukrainian officials. Volkov, who has lived in Lithuania since 2019, has apologized for the tone of the messages, but stood by his rejection of neo-Nazism. Lithuanian authorities are now reviewing his residence status. The Ukrainian charge carries a possible prison sentence of up to 8 years.
The United States and Armenia have agreed on a framework to develop a key trade corridor at the heart of the provisional Armenia-Azerbaijan peace deal signed last summer.
Announced after talks between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan, the plan centers on the new Trump route for international peace and prosperity. A joint venture will oversee development, with the United States holding a majority stake, while Armenia retains full sovereignty and control over borders and security decisions. The corridor is intended to link mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic and strengthen regional transit routes.
For this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.